I never wanted to burden you with grown-up problems, but I want you to know how deeply I've loved being your mom, even on the hard days. Especially on the hard days. There were nights I cried myself to sleep because I didn't know if I was doing anything right, but every time you smiled, every time you laughed, I felt like maybe I was enough for you. I know you don't always understand why I say no or why I ask you to do better, but it's only because I've seen how cruel the world can be, and I want you to walk into it with strength and kindness. Jack's throat tightened. He looked at the other letters. Dozens of them, some written when he was just a toddler, others more recent, filled with quiet victories and heartbreaks his mom never showed. He had spent the last few years brushing her off, calling her districto no fun. He never once paused to see the weight she carried. Alone, and here she was, pouring her entire soul into pages she never intended to be found, yet somehow knew he might need someday. That night, when Lisa returned from town and began unpacking groceries, Jack didn't say a word. He just walked up to her and wrapped his arms around her tightly. A rare hug. A long one. Lisa froze at first, surprised by the sudden affection. Then slowly, she smiled, placed a hand on his back, and said softly, "I've missed this." For the first time in a long time, Jack didn't feel awkward showing love. He finally saw his mom. Not just as a parent, but as a person, a fighter, and his big. After a long school year, this was supposed to be his time, but his mom had different plans. "We're going to spend the summer in a remote countryside cabin. Together," she said, smiling like it was the most exciting thing in the world. A cabin. In the middle of nowhere. No more internet. No PlayStation. Jack's face turned pale. It was his worst nightmare. He tried everything to escape the plan. He told her he was feeling sick. He said he had summer homework to finish. He even tried bargaining. "Let me stay at Uncle Rob's. I'll clean the garage every day." But his mom, Lisa, just chuckled, ruffled his hair, and said, "Jack, this summer will be good for both of us." And so they packed up the car, leaving behind the city noise, Jack's friends, his console, his social life, and drove 4 hours into the countryside. When they finally reached the cabin, Jack was speechless. Not because it was beautiful, but because it looked like something out of an old horror movie, surrounded by thick woods, no neighbors in sight, and worst of all, no Wi-Fi signal, not even one bar. He checked 3 times. Inside the cabin, it was clean, but old-fashioned. Wooden floors creaked under every step. The furniture looked like it hadn't been changed since the 80s. There was a bookshelf full of dusty novels, an old fireplace, and a tiny kitchen with no microwave. Jack threw himself on the couch, put on his headphones, and blasted music. He didn't want to talk. He didn't speak. He just pointed at Jack's t-shirt. It had a comic book superhero on it, and gave a soft, almost knowing smile. Then he turned back to his painting without another word. Weird. Jack slowly backed away and rushed home. He told his mom what happened, expecting her to freak out, call the police, or at least demand they pack up and leave. But instead, Lisa just sipped her tea and said, "Maybe he's just trying to find peace. Like us." Jack was stunned. Peace? He's sitting alone in the woods, talking to trees. His mom smiled. You never know what people are running from. Or toward. That night, Jack lay in bed staring at the ceiling. He couldn't stop thinking about the man. Something about him. The calmness, the silence, the strange way he looked at Jack like he already understood him, was haunting. The next day, curiosity won. Jack returned to the same trail and found the man in the exact spot, painting again as if he hadn't moved at all. Jack hesitated, then stepped forward. This time, the old man spoke. "You're not lost," he said, without looking up. "Just not where you expected to be." Jack blinked. "Excuse me?" The man chuckled lightly, dipping his brush into blue paint. "That's what your face says." And that was how it started. Over the next few days, Jack began visiting him regularly. They didn't talk much at first. Jack would sit nearby, watching the brush glide over the canvas. But slowly, the silence soft. Stories emerged. The old man's name was Thomas. He had once been a war photographer, traveling across countries torn by conflict. He had seen more pain. Imagine going on a summer vacation thinking it's going to be boring. No internet, no friends, just you and your mom in the middle of nowhere. That's what 14-year-old Jack believed. But what started as the worst trip of his life became the most unforgettable journey he'd ever take. A mysterious man in the woods, secret letters from his mom, and a moment in a thunderstorm that would change everything. This isn't just a story about summer. It's about love, loss, discovery, and a bond between a mother and son that even silence couldn't break. Trust me, you don't want to miss this one. You're kidding. Right. That was the only thing 14-year-old Jack could say when his mom dropped the biggest shock of his summer vacation. He had been dreaming of endless gaming marathons, junk food, stacked high, hanging out with friends at the mall, and sleeping in until noon. He didn't want to be there. He wanted to go home. Lisa didn't push. A nurse by profession and a single mom since Jack was a baby, she was used to being patient. She had always done everything to give Jack a good life. Double shifts, night duties, missed holidays, and maybe, just maybe, this summer was her way of reconnecting with the son she barely saw outside dinner time and homework arguments. But Jack couldn't see that yet. For the first few days, the silence between them was deafening. They ate meals quietly. Lisa would sip her morning coffee on the porch, looking out into the forest. Jack would sit inside, playing offline games on his phone, frustrated when the battery died. Occasionally, Lisa would ask, "Want to help me with lunch?" or "Want to come for a walk?" But Jack would always mutter, "I'm good," and turn away. One night, as thunder rolled in the distance and rain tapped gently on the cabin's roof, Jack sat by the window watching the lightning flash. He looked over at his mom, who was reading a book by candlelight, her face calm and soft in the glow. For a moment, he wondered, how was she so okay with all this? Why wasn't she missing the city, the TV, her work friends? He didn't know it yet, but Lisa had a reason. This summer wasn't just about unplugging, it was about healing. For both of them. She had watched her son slowly drift away, lost in screens, sarcasm, and silence. And this quiet cabin in the middle of nowhere was her final hope. Jack didn't know it then, but that vacation, the one he tried so hard to escape, was about to change his entire world. Because sometimes the best stories don't start with excitement. They begin with a grumpy teen, a wise mother, and a cabin full of quiet, and this was just the beginning. By the third day, Jack's frustration had reached its peak. His phone was dead. His tablet wouldn't load anything, and he was tired of staring at trees. So, out of sheer boredom, or maybe a silent scream for escape, he grabbed a jacket and stomped out into the woods near the cabin. He walked for nearly half an hour, kicking pine cones and grumbling under his breath, when suddenly he froze. There, hidden among the trees like a ghost from another time, sat an old man with wild gray hair and a paint-splattered jacket. A large canvas was propped on a wooden easel, and with slow, careful strokes, the man moved his brush across it, completely focused, as if the world didn't exist. Jack didn't know what to do. Should he say something? Run? Hide? Before he could decide, the old man looked up. The rain came fast, heavy, cold, and blinding. Thunder rolled overhead as wind whipped through the trees. Jack picked up his pace, heart pounding. And then, it happened! His foot landed on a mossy rock. It slipped. Crack. Jack fell hard. His ankle twisted beneath him with a sharp, unbearable pain. He cried out, trying to stand. But it was useless. Every movement sent shockwaves of pain through his leg. The rain poured harder. His clothes soaked. His body shaking. That's when he saw Thomas again. Appearing through the trees, his old coat pulled tight. But he was struggling himself. He wasn't strong enough to carry him the whole way. "I'll go get your mother," he said quickly. "Stay awake, all right?" Jack nodded, barely holding back tears. Nearly 20 minutes later, Lisa came running through the storm, completely drenched. She didn't pause for a second. She dropped to her knees beside Jack, checked his ankle, and without saying a word, lifted him onto her back. Jack shouted, "Mom, you can't carry me like this." But Lisa gritted her teeth and pushed on. Step by step, slip by slip, mile after mile. They reached the cabin nearly an hour later, soaked to the bone. Lisa didn't stop to dry off. She wrapped Jack's ankle, made hot soup, changed his clothes, and stayed beside him the whole night, dabbing his forehead and whispering, "You're safe," and destruction than most people could ever imagine. But the worst part, Thomas said one day, was the moments I couldn't capture. The ones too quiet, too human. Now, he painted them. The ones that never made the front pages, the hug between two strangers, a child sharing bread, a soldier crying in secret. Jack listened in awe. This wasn't just a man in the woods. This was someone who had lived, and now chose silence over noise. And somehow, Jack began to understand. Maybe he wasn't the only one trying to figure things out this summer. Maybe the stranger in the woods was exactly who he needed to meet. It was a quiet afternoon. The kind where the wind moves gently through the trees, and the world feels like it's taking a nap. Lisa had gone into the nearby town to buy some groceries and give Jack some alone time. Jack, now slightly more comfortable in the cabin, decided to explore inside instead of just scrolling through the same photos on his phone, while opening a narrow wooden cabinet in the corner of the living room, the one he hadn't touched since they arrived. Jack accidentally tugged the drawer too hard. It crashed to the floor
Thomas
with a
tried
loud
to help Jack
thud.
stand.
He quickly crouched to pick it up, worried he'd not have broken something. But instead, he found something unexpected. A small bundle of letters, neatly tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Jack froze. Each envelope was labeled in familiar handwriting. His mom's. Most of them didn't have dates, but a few had titles like, "When I Was Scared," "After You Fell Asleep Crying," and one that made his hands shake. "Jack, in case I'm gone someday." Curiosity and anxiety tangled in his chest as he slowly opened that letter. And what he read stopped time. If you're reading this, I'm not around to say these things out loud. Biggest fan. The days that followed felt lighter. Jack and his mom shared more small talk during meals. He didn't hide behind headphones anymore. Sometimes, he'd even sit next to her on the porch in the evening, quietly watching the sunset. But something else had also become a quiet rhythm in his life. His visits to Thomas. Every day after breakfast, Jack would hike the trail into the woods. He no longer found the forest creepy. In fact, it felt calming. Familia. And Thomas, he had become a silent mentor. A man who listened without judgment and spoke only when the words really mattered. One afternoon, dark clouds began creeping across the sky. Jack had lost track of time while watching Thomas paint a new piece. Something with deep oranges and grays, almost like fire meeting fog. "You should head back," Thomas said, glancing at the sky. "Storms coming." Jack nodded and started jogging down the slippery trail. But just minutes into the "You're okay," thunder echoed in the distance.